Eirik, a young Viking from the rugged fjords of the north, had always felt a restless pull toward the unknown. The village seer, her eyes clouded with the haze of prophecy, had whispered of his fate, that he would sail beyond seas where no man dared, face trials that would test his strength and spirit, and confront the very threads of destiny. As he prepared his longship, the villagers whispered his name, calling him the Seeker, one who might earn the favor of the gods or draw their wrath. The voyage began under a blood-orange dawn, the sea rolling with a fury that promised both adventure and death. Storms assailed their ship, thunder echoing like Thor's hammer, and Eirik prayed not to gods, but to the courage that stirred within him. On the third night, a great shadow rose from the depths, a sea serpent, scales glimmering like molten silver, eyes like abyssal fire. With a battle cry that split the air, Eirik and his crew fought the beast. Steel rang against scales, arrows hissed through the storm, and though many fell, the serpent finally sank beneath the waves. The sailors whispered of Odin's favor, but Eirik knew it was their own will, their refusal to yield, that carried them through. Days later, they arrived upon a mysterious island shrouded in mist, the forests alive with whispers and shadows. There, Eirik encountered creatures from the sagas of old, draugrs, restless warriors bound by curses, jotuns, towering beings of stone and frost, and spectral ravens that seemed to guide him. In the center of the island, he found a hall carved from obsidian, where the Norns themselves awaited, weaving threads of destiny even as the air crackled with tension. They spoke in voices that were both wind and stone, that Ragnarok had been set in motion, but a mortal's defiance could break the cycle. Eirik realized his path would not end at glory or death. He was to confront fate itself. The voyage home became a race against shadows. Loki's whispers sought to twist his crew, sowing discord and doubt. Odin's ravens, though absent, left trails of omens. Eirik's resolve held. Yet as he returned to familiar shores, he found his village in ruin, fire and ash the remnants of a raid by men and spirits alike. Here, he understood that his trials were far from over. To protect the dawn, he must face gods, monsters, and the very void of creation itself. Ragnarok came in a blaze that consumed heaven and earth. The 9 realms trembled as Fenrir tore chains and Jormungandr encircled the seas. Thor's hammer clashed with Surtur's fire, Odin fell to the wolf, and the world tree quaked under the weight of fate. Eirik stood amidst the chaos, axe in hand, fighting not for glory but to shield what little remained of mortal life. Astrid and Bjorn, his closest allies, fought alongside him, their courage unwavering as the earth split and skies burned. Even as the realms collapsed, Eirik's will did not falter. He struck at remnants of gods and monsters alike, seeking to carve a path where humanity could survive. As the flames of Ragnarok consumed the heavens, the Norns appeared one final time. The threads of gods are cut, they whispered, but the thread of men remains. They offered no guidance, only a warning. Eirik's survival would be pivotal for what was to come. Mortals, not gods, would now bear the weight of creation. When the smoke cleared, the world was reborn. Yggdrasil, though scarred, sent new roots into fertile earth. Fresh rivers ran where once fire had consumed. Skjoldheim, a valley untouched by divine ruin, became the first bastion of human civilization, where survivors gathered to rebuild. Eirik, Astrid, and Bjorn planted the seeds of what would become the Age of Men, teaching that courage, wisdom, and unity would replace the guidance of gods. Yet even in the reborn world, shadows lingered. Hjálfheimai, a warlord claiming fragments of divine power, sought to dominate men through fear and fire. His raids tested Skjoldheim, forcing Eirik and his companions to fight armies of men who had been twisted by ambition and lingering magic. They clashed in the Valley of Ashes, and Eirik struck down Kjell, shattering the shard of Surtur's fire he wielded. The survivors of his army swore fealty to Skjoldheim, forming the first confederation of free men, united not by godly decree but by shared purpose and courage. Eirik's vision expanded beyond the valley. With Astrid and Bjorn, he led expeditions north into the frost wastes, east into dense forests, and along uncharted rivers. He encountered tribes shaped by isolation, some thriving, others oppressed by fear or superstition. The ruins of the old world appeared, filled with runes older than memory and remnants of magic that survived Ragnarok. Here, the echoes of gods, giants, and even the void lingered, hinting at powers that could shape or destroy. Tales reached Eirik of a mysterious figure called the Child of the Void, who bent reality and minds to his will, a new test of human ambition and cunning. The Age of Men, Eirik realized, was not only about survival and civilization, but also about confronting remnants of the old cosmos, testing diplomacy, leadership, and moral strength. With the Confederation established, Eirik led expeditions to distant lands, seeking alliances and knowledge. In the Frost Wastes, he secured the loyalty of hardy northern tribes. In the eastern forests, he navigated political intrigue, building bonds with independent clans while encountering the ruins of ancient civilizations. Each encounter tested his wisdom and diplomacy. Brute force alone would not suffice in this age. Yet the whispers of the void persisted, carried by the wind and shadow, reminding all that creation's remnants were still alive. The first true confrontation with this new threat came when Kaelin's followers, now dispersed across the east, stirred unrest and rebellion. Eirik led a coalition of free men to meet him. Skjoldheim's armies clashed with Kaelin's forces in forests twisted by illusion and fire. Steel rang against shadow, while Astrid's runes turned fire back upon its wielders. Eirik faced Kaelin directly, striking down his illusions and disarming him, yet sparing him to preserve the principle that the Age of Men must be ruled by choice, not fear. The Confederation endured, but exploration revealed even greater mysteries. Along uncharted rivers and coasts, Eirik found villages untouched by Skjoldheim, remnants of civilizations that had survived the gods' fall. Some offered knowledge, some hostility, and some bore traces of void-born phenomena, strange lights, impossible beasts, and whispers that seemed older than time. Eirik realized that humanity's new dawn would be a test not only of courage, but of moral resolve, unity, and wisdom. Years passed. Skjoldheim and its allies grew into a network of free communities, trading, sharing knowledge, and defending against threats both human and supernatural. Eirik, now weathered but unbroken, guided them with the lessons of his voyages, that men could shape their own destinies, that freedom was fragile, and that the shadows of the old world must always be respected but not feared. He understood that the void, gods, and giants were no longer the masters of fate. Men were. Yet their world was not without peril. Ambition, cunning, and remnants of ancient chaos waited in the dark, testing the ideals of the Age of Men. Eirik stood upon a hill overlooking Skjoldheim, Astrid at his side, Bjorn leaning on his axe. The horizon stretched endlessly, filled with forests, mountains, rivers, and seas. The Age of Men had begun in earnest, shaped by courage, wisdom, and will. The gods had fallen, the void had been tempered, and humanity walked freely for the first time. Yet the saga was far from over. New lands awaited exploration, new leaders would rise, and new threats, human, magical, and primordial, would challenge the fragile dawn. Eirik, the seeker who had defied fate itself, knew that the greatest battles were still ahead, for the world now belonged entirely to men, and it was up to them to wield it wisely. Years had passed since Eirik and his companions united the first confederation of free men. Skjoldheim had grown from a valley of survivors into a thriving center of civilization. Villages connected through roads and rivers, trade flowed between distant tribes, and learning spread, not through priests or divine mandate, but through the efforts and wisdom of men themselves. Eirik had become a figure not of legend alone, but of governance and guidance, shaping laws and councils for this new world. Yet the horizon called to him still. Astrid and Bjorn were at his side, urging exploration beyond the mountains, across uncharted rivers, and to coasts unknown to Skjoldheim's maps. Tales of distant lands reached them, islands where strange beasts ruled, deserts where fire and stone defied logic, forests thick with shadows that moved unnaturally. Some spoke of remnants of void-born creatures, while others whispered of men corrupted by powers they could not understand. Eirik assembled a fleet, larger than before, carrying warriors, scholars, and scouts. The expedition sailed first north to the frost wastes, where tribes had adapted to the harshest climates. They brought with them knowledge, forming alliances that expanded the Confederation's influence. Eirik respected their ways, learning survival skills, hunting methods, and winter lore. Yet he also noticed oddities: auroras that seemed to form shapes, frozen lakes that glimmered like molten metal, and shadows that moved independently, hinting that remnants of the void still lingered in the northern wilderness. From there, they journeyed east, through thick forests and over wild rivers. Villages untouched by Skjoldheim's influence were met with careful diplomacy. Some kingdoms were hostile, others cautious, and a few had been influenced by Kaelin's dispersed followers, spreading fear and whispers of dark powers. In these forests, Eirik discovered ruins older than memory, stone halls inscribed with runes predating the known 9 realms, weapons fused with unknown metals, and magical wards still active. Shadowed creatures lurked among the ruins, remnants of gods, giants, or even void-born entities, testing the courage and judgment of any who dared approach. The Confederation was further challenged when news arrived of a new threat: the so-called Child of the Void, a figure rumored to wield fragments of Ginnungagap itself. This being did not move armies or strike with brute force, but sowed fear, manipulation, and illusion, subtly corrupting men's minds and ambitions. Eirik realized that the Age of Men was not only a test of survival and strength, but of wisdom, moral resolve, and unity. Eirik confronted this threat by sending envoys and scouts, mapping the extent of the child's influence while avoiding direct confrontation until the Confederation could present a united front. Alongside Astrid and Bjorn, he traveled into distant lands, forging alliances and uniting previously independent tribes under the shared goal of freedom and survival. Villages began to adopt a network of communication through messengers and signal fires, sharing knowledge and resources, creating the first human civilization in the post-God world that was truly interconnected. Conflicts arose with rival kingdoms and ambitious warlords, testing Eirik's leadership. Some sought to exploit fear or old remnants of magic, while others challenged the Confederation politically. Each time, Eirik's combination of courage, diplomacy, and vision allowed him to prevail. Battles were fought, but more often, conflicts were resolved through negotiation, alliances, and the careful demonstration of Skjoldheim's strength and fairness. Yet the shadows of the void remained. Strange phenomena persisted: forests that seemed to rearrange themselves, rivers that whispered warnings, and shadows that moved without bodies. Eirik realized that humanity's freedom did not mean the world was safe. It meant men had to navigate threats without the guidance of gods, facing moral dilemmas, ambition, and the echoes of creation itself. Eirik and Astrid began training a new generation of leaders, warriors, diplomats, and scholars capable of defending the world, understanding the old powers, and ensuring that the ideals of freedom endured. Bjorn, ever the stalwart companion, became a guardian of the Confederation, leading forces into distant lands to quell rebellion or assist allies. The Confederation grew into a sprawling network of cities, forts, and trade routes, connected not by divine rule, but by shared commitment to liberty, law, and mutual defense. The world had changed. Men now shaped their own destinies, building civilizations, exploring lands unknown, and learning to wield both courage and wisdom as tools of survival. Yet, somewhere in distant forests, mountains, and seas, remnants of void-born power stirred, a reminder that the Age of Men, while free, would never be without trials. Eirik, standing on the cliffs overlooking the endless horizon, watched fleets sail north and east, caravans move across forests, and the first signs of cities rising on distant plains. He understood that his role was not only to fight, but to guide, teach, and inspire. The Age of Men was young, full of promise and peril, and it was up to humanity itself to determine whether the world would thrive or fall into shadow. With Astrid and Bjorn at his side, Eirik's gaze turned to the horizon once more. The seas were vast, the forests deep, and the mountains endless. Beyond them lay mysteries, lost civilizations, and challenges older than men could imagine. Yet for the first time, the world belonged entirely to mortals. It was theirs to shape, defend, and understand. And Eirik, the Seeker who had defied gods, monsters, and even the void itself, knew that the saga of humanity was only beginning. The age of men had dawned, and its story would be written by courage, wisdom, and the indomitable will of those who dared to shape their own fate. Years had passed since the Confederation of Free Men was founded, and Skjoldheim had transformed into a thriving hub of civilization. Roads connected distant villages, rivers became trade routes, and scholars and artisans spread knowledge of farming, metalwork, and navigation. Eirik, now a seasoned leader, knew that survival alone was no longer enough. Humanity had to explore, understand, and secure the world. He led expeditions north into the frost wastes, east into dense forests, and along uncharted rivers. The northern tribes, hardened by ice and snow, joined the Confederation, bringing knowledge of survival and warfare in harsh climates. In the east, independent kingdoms presented diplomatic challenges, some accepting alliances, others wary of Skjoldheim's influence. Ancient ruins were discovered, halls of stone inscribed with runes older than memory, remnants of gods, giants, and possibly even fragments of Ginnungagap. Some ruins were haunted by shadowed creatures, forcing Eirik to combine caution, courage, and cunning to navigate them safely. Among these discoveries came troubling rumors. A new figure, called the Child of the Void, emerged from the depths of legend. Unlike Kalin, this figure wielded powers drawn directly from Ginnungagap itself. It did not command armies openly but sowed discord, temptation, and fear, influencing men to act against their own freedom. Eirik realized that human ambition, when twisted by these lingering powers, could become as dangerous as any god or monster. Eirik organized the Confederation to respond. Scouts mapped the child's influence, envoys traveled to distant tribes, and alliances were strengthened. The first major confrontation came when a coalition of the child's followers attacked a trading route between Skjoldheim and the northern tribes. Eirik led the defenders, combining military strategy with careful use of terrain and intelligence. Astrid wielded runes to shield the villages, while Bjorn led a vanguard that turned the tide of battle. The child's illusions challenged their perception, making forests twist and rivers appear where none existed. But Eirik's experience, forged through battles with gods and the void, allowed him to see through the deception. The confrontation climaxed in a duel of will. Eirik faced the child directly, resisting its mental manipulation and illusions with the strength of human purpose, the loyalty of allies, and the determination to protect freedom. Though the child was powerful, it was bound by the remnants of creation. Mortal courage and unity could counter it. Eirik forced the child to retreat, leaving behind followers who, once freed from its influence, were given the choice to join the Confederation or walk away into isolation. Meanwhile, the Confederation continued to grow. Trade routes expanded to distant coasts, knowledge of medicine, agriculture, and metallurgy spread, and human settlements multiplied. Yet Eirik knew that the world remained fragile. Shadows of old powers lingered, void-born phenomena, enchanted ruins, and creatures that defied natural laws. Ambitious humans could still sow chaos if wisdom and unity faltered. Eirik trained a new generation of leaders, warriors, diplomats, scholars, to carry forward the ideals of the age of men: freedom, courage, and the responsibility to protect and guide their world. As the years progressed, humanity began to explore not only land but also sea. Eirik's fleet ventured beyond familiar horizons, mapping distant islands and encountering civilizations shaped by survival, ingenuity, and remnants of the old cosmos. Some were hostile, some curious, and some possessed knowledge of powers older than men could fully comprehend. Every encounter reinforced Eirik's conviction that the age of men would succeed not by domination, but by cooperation, wisdom, and the careful use of power. Eirik, Astrid, and Bjorn stood upon a cliff overlooking the endless ocean, watching fleets sail north and east, caravans move through forests and valleys, and cities rise across plains. The world was alive with possibility, shaped not by gods or monsters, but by human will. Yet the horizon remained filled with uncertainty. Void-born shadows stirred in distant forests, Ambition festered in unseen corners, and remnants of divine and primordial powers still lingered. Eirik spoke quietly to Astrid, his eyes on the horizon. The gods are gone. The void has been tempered, but the world still tests us. If men are to endure, we must guide them, teach them, and sometimes fight to preserve the freedom we earned. Astrid nodded. We have built a dawn, but the day is still young. The world belongs to men now, but only if they are brave enough to claim it. Bjorn laughed, his voice carrying across the valley. Let them come. Let every shadow and ambition rise. The age of men will stand, and it will endure because we will not falter. And so, humanity's saga continued. The age of men had truly begun, a world forged from courage, wisdom, and will, free from gods but haunted by the echoes of the old cosmos. Eirik knew that the greatest trials were still ahead, not monsters or gods, but the challenges of human ambition, morality, and unity. And as long as men had the courage to shape their own fate, the world would remain alive, vibrant, and free. The seas, forests, mountains, and skies stretched endlessly before them. Beyond them lay mysteries, civilizations yet undiscovered, dangers still hidden, and the lingering whispers of void-born power. But for the first time in history, the world belonged entirely to mortals, and it was up to them, guided by visionaries like Eirik, Astrid, and Bjorn, to write the next chapters of its story. The age of men had dawned, and its tale was just beginning. Decades had passed since the Confederation of Free Men was founded. Skjoldheim had grown into a sprawling city of stone and timber, with watchtowers guarding trade routes and halls where councils of leaders debated laws and strategy. The Confederation now stretched across forests, rivers, and mountains, a network of allied tribes and settlements bound by shared ideals rather than fear. Humanity was beginning to shape its destiny, but the world still held mysteries and dangers beyond even Eirik's foresight. The first great challenge emerged in the southern coasts, where explorers reported strange lands rising from the mist, islands untouched by men, where animals grew to unnatural sizes and rivers ran with water that seemed to shimmer with shadows. On one of these islands, scouts discovered ruins older than even the Norns' whispers, structures carved from black stone and etched with runes that glowed faintly in the night. When a small party touched the stones, visions flooded their minds, flashes of Ginnungagap, glimpses of gods and giants, and warnings of forces that had survived Ragnarok, patient and waiting. Eirik gathered the Confederation's leaders. We face a world older than any of us imagined, he said. The void's fragments still linger, and men's ambitions will shape whether this world thrives or falls. We must prepare, not just with swords, but with wisdom, law, and courage. Meanwhile, human ambition began to test the Confederation. Some allied kingdoms, inspired by the tales of Skjoldheim's victories, sought to expand their power unchecked. Disputes over trade routes, borders, and influence erupted. While some leaders acted with honor, others embraced cunning and deception, risking the fragile unity Eirik had built. He realized that the age of men would demand vigilance. Men could be their greatest allies or their deadliest enemies. To meet these challenges, Eirik trained a new generation of leaders, teaching diplomacy, strategy, and the moral responsibilities of power. Astrid instructed scholars in the study of the void-born phenomena, ensuring that humanity could understand the remnants of old powers without succumbing to them. Bjorn led expeditions to distant lands, securing alliances, and confronting rogue warlords who threatened to plunge regions into chaos. Even as humanity expanded, the void itself stirred. The child of the void, a figure whose powers were fragments of Ginnungagap, had grown more cunning. It no longer relied solely on deception. It influenced men from afar, whispering ambition, greed, and fear into the ears of rulers. Entire villages rose and fell under its subtle manipulations. Eirik knew that brute force would not suffice. He and Astrid developed ways to detect its influence, guiding leaders and citizens to resist temptation and deception, while showing that true power came from unity and wisdom, not domination. The first open confrontation came when a city under the child's influence attempted to rebel, calling on void-born creatures to fight for them. Eirik led a coalition army, composed of humans from across the Confederation, to quell the uprising. Steel clashed against unnatural shadows. Arrows flew through forests that bent unnaturally, and the ground trembled with void-born energy. Astrid's runes shielded the troops, turning the worst of the shadows back upon their wielders. Bjorn's warriors pressed the enemy lines, creating openings for Eirik to strike decisively at the leaders of the rebellion. Eirik's courage and leadership inspired those around him, not through divine power, not through magic, but through human will, intelligence, and the bonds forged between allies. He confronted the most influential agent of the Child of the Void, a man whose mind had been twisted into a reflection of Ginnungagap itself. Eirik fought him not only with steel, but with understanding, appealing to his remaining humanity and offering redemption rather than annihilation. Many of the rebels, seeing their leaders choose conscience over chaos, laid down their arms. The victory strengthened the Confederation, proving that men could survive and thrive without gods. Yet Eirik understood that the world remained perilous. The Void's fragments were scattered, ambition could corrupt, and the moral challenges of freedom were ongoing. Humanity had claimed the world, but it now had to learn to govern itself, resist temptation, and confront threats that were both external and internal. As Eirik stood atop a cliff overlooking a vast expanse of forests, rivers, and settlements, he reflected on the journey from a restless Viking seeking glory to the architect of a human age. The seas beyond still held uncharted lands. The forest hid mysteries older than men, and the shadows of the void waited patiently. But the age of men had dawned, and for the first time, the fate of the world lay entirely in mortal hands. Astrid joined him, her gaze following the horizon. "The world is ours to shape, Seeker," she said, "but we must be vigilant. Men will test each other, and the shadows will test all of us." Bjorn grinned, hefting his axe. "Let them come. The seas, the forests, the void itself. It will all bend to men if we are strong enough." Eirik smiled, knowing that the story was far from over. The age of men had begun, but its true trials, the rise of civilizations, the moral challenges of freedom, and the encounters with the lingering remnants of creation, were only starting. Humanity's epic had just begun, and its legacy would be written not by gods, but by the courage, wisdom, and will of men who dared to shape their own destiny. Generations had passed since Eirik first set sail beyond the fjords of his youth. Skjoldheim had transformed into a grand city, its halls of stone and timber echoing with the voices of leaders, scholars, and artisans. Roads and rivers connected distant lands, and a network of allied settlements formed the backbone of a burgeoning human empire. Under Eirik's guidance, the Confederation had grown from a network of tribes into a civilization capable of withstanding not only natural disasters, but also the lingering threats of ambition, deception, and ancient chaos. Yet the world beyond remained untamed. Far to the west lay archipelagos shrouded in mist, said to be home to beasts that dwarfed any man or ship. The northern ice floes held secrets of vanished civilizations, their ruins buried beneath glaciers that shimmered like molten silver. And in the east, vast forests and mountains concealed remnants of void-born power, places where reality itself seemed to bend, and whispers of Ginnungagap stirred in the minds of those who dared enter. Eirik knew that exploration was no longer optional. It was necessary to secure humanity's future. He organized fleets of ships and armies of scholars, warriors, and scouts. Astrid led the study of void-born phenomena, recording their effects and teaching the Confederation how to resist manipulation and deception. Bjorn commanded expeditionary forces, ready to defend against both hostile men and unnatural creatures. Their first major expedition led them westward across storm-lashed seas. Islands rose from the mist, forests and mountains alive with creatures of impossible size and ferocity. The explorers discovered ruins older than any known civilization, structures carved from black stone etched with runes that pulsed faintly in the moonlight. Shadows stirred within, remnants of the void's presence lingering like echoes of creation itself. Scouts reported sightings of massive serpentine creatures and spectral predators, but through careful strategy and courage, the Confederation mapped the islands, claimed safe harbors, and established footholds for trade and settlement. Meanwhile, unrest emerged within humanity itself. Some leaders, intoxicated by their newfound power, sought to dominate rather than ally. Trade disputes escalated into skirmishes, and ambitions clashed with the principles Eirik had fought to establish. He realized that the greatest threat to the age of men was not monsters or void-born powers, but men's own desires, their pride, fear, and hunger for dominance. In the forests of the East, Eirik faced the most profound challenge yet, the last known agent of the Void, a figure who wielded power derived directly from Ginnungagap. This being could twist reality, conjure shadows, and influence the minds of rulers across continents. Entire cities teetered, on the brink of chaos, driven by whispers that promised power, immortality, or forbidden knowledge. Eirik and his allies organized the greatest coalition yet assembled, warriors from Skjoldheim, northern hunters, eastern clans, and distant settlements brought together not by fear, but by shared purpose. Astrid devised wards and runes to counter the Void's influence, while Bjorn commanded the army to strategic positions. The confrontation was unlike any battle before. Forests bent unnaturally, shadows moved as if alive, and rivers of blackened water cut through the land. The Void agent struck with illusion, twisting allies into enemies and whispering betrayal. Yet Eirik, standing at the forefront, wielded not divine power but human courage, unity, and resolve. He fought through illusions, rallied his allies, and directly confronted the Void agent. The duel was as much of mind and spirit as of steel, with Eirik resisting corruption and demonstrating the strength of human will. Through wisdom, perseverance, and the unity of humanity, the Void agent was finally defeated. Its influence waned, the shadows receded, and the land began to heal. Humanity had faced the lingering chaos of creation itself, not with gods to guide them, but with courage, intelligence, and moral strength. The victory marked the true dawn of the Age of Men. Skjoldheim and its allied settlements became the foundation of the first human empires, expanding trade, knowledge, and culture across the known world. Scholars studied the ruins of the old world, not to harness divine power, but to understand it, while warriors defended civilization against both ambition and lingering threats. Eirik, now older and weathered, stood atop a high cliff overlooking the vast lands he had helped unite. Beyond the forests, mountains, and seas lay uncharted lands, lost civilizations, and mysteries yet untouched. Yet for the first time, humanity was truly free. No gods, no giants, no void-born powers ruled over them. The world belonged to men, and it was their courage, wisdom, and will that would shape its destiny. Astrid, at his side, looked out across the horizon. The world is ours to shape, Seeker, but the true test is yet to come. Can men govern themselves, resist ambition, and endure when shadows of the past call to them? Bjorn raised his axe to the wind, voice carrying across the plains. Let them come. Let ambition, greed, and the void itself rise. We will endure, and the Age of Men will not falter. Eirik nodded, a quiet smile on his face. The saga was far from over. The Age of Men had dawned, but its story, the rise of civilizations, the exploration of unknown lands, and the moral trials of freedom was only beginning. Humanity would now write its own destiny, and the world, once ruled by gods and chaos, would forever bear the imprint of mortal hands. Generations passed, and Skjoldheim had become the heart of a sprawling network of human civilization. Roads stretched across forests, mountains, and rivers, connecting cities and settlements. Trade, scholarship, and craft flourished. Astrid's teachings endured, guiding scholars and engineers to study the ruins of the old world, not to seize its power, but to understand it. Bjorn's descendants became commanders of vast armies, protecting borders and maintaining unity among distant lands. Humanity had learned to govern itself, but the world remained wild and mysterious. Explorers set sail across seas that had once been thought impassable, discovering continents teeming with flora and fauna unknown to Skjoldheim. Massive forests hid tribes with unique cultures, islands held ruins older than memory, and mountains concealed remnants of void-born energy that could still twist minds and reality. Humanity's reach expanded, But so did the challenges. Distant rulers tempted by ambition, lands cursed with lingering shadows, and whispers of Ginnungagap calling to the bold or foolish. In one remote eastern forest, scouts discovered the remnants of a civilization that had survived Ragnarok untouched. Their leaders wielded fragments of void-born knowledge, not openly destructive, but capable of sowing doubt, fear, and ambition. Eirik, now aged but sharp, led emissaries to meet them, offering alliances and shared knowledge. Yet when a faction refused, seeking to dominate through void-born sorcery, conflict erupted. The ensuing campaign combined diplomacy, strategy, and battlefield ingenuity. Astrid's wards shielded their troops, while Bjorn's forces maneuvered through forests and rivers. Eirik's leadership, emphasizing courage, unity, and moral purpose, turned the tide, and many of the opposing factions chose integration over resistance. Meanwhile, the seas called again. Ships sailed west and south, discovering islands inhabited by colossal beasts, volcanoes that burned with unnatural fire, and ruins older than any known record. Expeditions documented these lands, mapped trade routes, and established settlements. Humans learned to harness natural forces, wind, water, and animal migration, rather than relying on magic or divine favor. Yet, wherever civilization spread, the lingering echoes of the void reminded them that the world still contained unknown dangers. Human ambition remained the greatest test. In some distant lands, rulers sought to conquer neighbors, inspired by fear or promises of power whispered by void-born remnants. The Confederation evolved into a complex network of councils and alliances, emphasizing laws, fairness, and the balance of power. The leaders of Skjoldheim trained diplomats, generals, and scholars to guide humanity, understanding that freedom required vigilance, moral integrity, and the courage to confront corruption both within and without. 1 century after the dawn of the Confederation, rumors emerged of a final, powerful remnant of Ginnungagap. It no longer acted directly, but influenced minds across continents, subtly twisting ambition and greed. Eirik, now legendary in stories but still alive through the vigor of his descendants, organized the greatest expedition yet. His children, trained in both combat and wisdom, led armies, scholars, and scouts to confront the threat. Battles erupted not only on land but in mines, where leaders were swayed, villages tempted, and entire regions teetered on the brink. The decisive confrontation occurred in a canyon deep in the eastern mountains, where the void-born remnant had taken root in ancient ruins. Shadows moved as if alive, and the air itself seemed to resist human presence. Eirik's descendants led the Confederation's forces, combining strategy, courage, and moral leadership. Astrid's wards, now taught widely across the Confederation, shielded the troops from manipulation. Bjorn's lineage commanded the front lines with unmatched skill. Through perseverance, unity, and unwavering moral purpose, humanity finally quelled the remnant's influence. Shadows faded, illusions unraveled, and the echo of Ginnungagap was finally silenced. With this victory, the Age of Men truly entered its prime. Civilizations flourished across continents. Knowledge, trade, and culture spread. Humans no longer feared gods, giants, or void-born powers, though they respected the past, studying it to avoid repeating its mistakes. Generations remembered Eirik, Astrid, and Bjorn not just as heroes, but as architects of a world governed by courage, wisdom, and moral integrity. From distant cliffs, explorers gazed at endless seas, mountains, and forests, ready to chart lands unknown. Scholars deciphered ancient ruins, learning lessons from civilizations older than memory. Warriors trained to protect freedom and defend against ambition that might threaten unity. And across the lands, communities thrived, built on trust, courage, and the lessons of the first seeker. Eirik, finally resting after a lifetime of adventure, watched his descendants continue the work he began. The world was vast, vibrant, and alive, shaped not by gods or fate, but by men themselves. The Age of Men had fully dawned, proving that courage, wisdom, and unity could overcome chaos, ambition, and the remnants of creation itself. And yet, the horizon remained endless, filled with mysteries, challenges, and opportunities. Humanity's story would continue, forever testing its courage, moral strength, and ability to shape a world once ruled by gods, monsters, and the void. The saga of the Seeker had ended, but the epic of humanity had only just begun. Centuries had passed since Eirik's first voyage beyond the fjords. Skjoldheim had grown into a grand metropolis, surrounded by fortresses, academies, and trade hubs stretching across forests, mountains, and rivers. The Confederation had evolved into a true network of nations, united by laws, diplomacy, and shared ideals, yet diverse in culture and governance. Human civilization was now a force capable of shaping its environment, cultivating lands, and traversing seas that had once been impossible to cross. Explorers sailed westward to continents untouched by men. Vast plains stretched beneath towering mountains, forests teeming with strange creatures, and islands rose from mists where enormous beasts roamed. Expeditions documented new flora and fauna, mapped the geography, and established colonies that grew into thriving cities. Scholars studied ancient ruins and void-born remnants, learning their secrets not to wield power, but to understand and contain them. Humanity's intelligence, ingenuity, and moral guidance had become its greatest weapon, replacing the need for gods or magic. Despite this flourishing, challenges persisted. Ambition among rulers sometimes threatened the unity of the Confederation. Some leaders sought dominance rather than alliance, while others were tempted by the subtle remnants of Ginnungagap, lingering in isolated ruins, forgotten artifacts, or whispers of shadow. To counter this, councils of leaders, descendants of Eirik, Astrid, and Bjorn, worked to maintain balance, teaching new generations of rulers to govern wisely and ethically. They emphasized that freedom required vigilance and moral responsibility, for the world now belonged entirely to men. A new era of exploration revealed lands previously unimagined. To the far north, glacial mountains concealed civilizations adapted to ice and cold, who possessed knowledge of survival, metallurgy, and navigation beyond the known world. To the far east, endless forests hid villages skilled in diplomacy and war, guarding ruins older than memory, where void-born energy still lingered subtly. To the south and west, archipelagos and coastal regions harbored creatures of impossible size and intelligence, some hostile, some curious. Human ingenuity, courage, and diplomacy allowed these new societies to be mapped, studied, and integrated into the growing network of civilization. The greatest trial came when a coalition of ambitious rulers attempted to exploit ancient void-born remnants for power. Using relics and ruins scattered across the continents, they tried to sow fear and rebellion, spreading influence through deception and shadows. The descendants of Eirik, now leading the Confederation, faced these challenges not with divine intervention, but through strategy, courage, and moral leadership. Astrid's teachings of wards, observation, and understanding of void phenomena were widely applied. Bjorn's descendants commanded armies that could respond quickly and decisively. The decisive confrontation occurred in a vast canyon where void-born remnants had concentrated over centuries. Shadows twisted the land, creating illusions and confusion among the armies. Entire regions wavered under the pressure of deception, yet the coalition of free men, guided by the principles of unity, courage, and wisdom, overcame these trials. The ambitious rulers who sought domination were defeated or persuaded to integrate into the Confederation under fair laws. Void-born remnants were contained, sealed, or studied to prevent future misuse. Humanity had triumphed not through divine favor, but through the combination of moral clarity, unity, and ingenuity, proving once and for all that men could govern themselves. Over the following centuries, human civilization expanded further. Cities rose across plains and coasts, trade routes connected continents, and knowledge spread like wildfire. Scholars deciphered ancient languages, discovered the secrets of void-born remnants, and cataloged the history of gods, giants, and the chaos that had once ruled the world. Explorers mapped every ocean, mountain, and forest they could reach, integrating distant cultures into the Confederation while respecting their autonomy. Warfare became rare, replaced increasingly by diplomacy, alliances, and shared knowledge. The story of Eirik, Astrid, and Bjorn became legend, their deeds taught as history and morality. Humanity no longer feared the gods or void-born entities, though it never forgot the lessons they had imposed. The age of men had matured into an era of civilization where courage, wisdom, and moral responsibility defined power, and where the world was truly shaped by mortal hands. Yet the horizon remained vast and full of mystery. There were still lands unmapped, ruins unexplored, and subtle remnants of Ginnungagap hidden in places where even centuries of human effort had not yet reached. Humanity's journey was far from complete, but now, for the first time in history, the world belonged entirely to mortals, and their saga would be written by their own courage, intelligence, and unity. The age of men had fully dawned. What had begun with the restless seeker from a small fjord now spanned continents, cultures, and generations. Humanity had endured storms, monsters, gods, void, and ambition itself. And in the quiet moments, standing atop cliffs, overlooking seas, mountains, and forests, men could finally see that their world, shaped by their own hands, was alive, vibrant, and theirs to guide, defend, and explore. Centuries had passed, and the confederation of free men had spread across continents. Humanity had tamed rivers, climbed mountains, sailed vast seas, and built cities from forests, plains, and coasts. Scholars studied the remnants of the gods, the whispers of Ginnungagap, and the ruins of civilizations older than memory. Warriors trained in defense and strategy, while diplomats and leaders ensured the fragile unity of a world no longer bound by divine decree. Eirik, now long departed from the mortal world, had left behind a legacy of courage, wisdom, and moral clarity. Astrid and Bjorn's descendants carried his vision, ensuring that the Confederation endured through centuries of growth and trial. Yet, as human civilization expanded, the horizon remained vast, uncharted, and filled with mysteries. Islands rose from the mist, mountains hid lost civilizations, and forests whispered with shadows of powers long past. One night, on the cliffs of Skjoldheim, a council of the Confederation's leaders gathered. The eldest among them, a descendant of Eirik, gazed over the seas. "We have shaped the world with our hands and our courage," he said. "But even now, the remnants of the old cosmos stir. Void-born energy lingers in hidden ruins, and ambition among men grows as ever. We must remain vigilant, not just to defend our lands, but to teach the generations that follow to wield freedom wisely." From the horizon came a glimmer, faint at first, like a ripple in reality itself. Explorers had returned from distant coasts with tales of a new phenomenon, lands that shifted with the wind, rivers that flowed backward, and strange lights dancing in the skies. The scouts whispered of a power neither divine nor entirely mortal, a force that had been quietly observing the rise of men. The council understood. The age of men had truly begun, but the world was far from tamed. Humanity's strength lay not in conquest or fear, but in courage, wisdom, unity, and the moral choices that defined their civilization. They resolved to explore these mysteries together, combining knowledge, vigilance, and compassion. And so, fleets sailed toward the unknown, scholars ventured into forests older than time, and warriors trained to defend against threats both seen and unseen. Humanity had conquered the gods, tempered the void, and survived monsters, but the story of men was not yet finished. Every new discovery, every challenge, and every choice would be written into the saga of the age of men. High atop a cliff, overlooking the endless seas, forests, and mountains, the leaders of humanity, descendants of Eirik, Astrid, and Bjorn, stood together. The wind carried the scent of salt and pine, of new lands yet unexplored. They knew that the world, alive with mystery and possibility, belonged to them. And in the quiet of the night, as stars shimmered over distant continents, a single truth echoed across the lands. The age of men had dawned, and for the first time in history, the fate of the world rested entirely in mortal hands. The legacy of the Seeker, who had once defied gods, monsters, and the void itself, would endure, not as legend alone, but as the guiding light of humanity, shaping a world alive with courage, wisdom, and endless possibility. The horizon remained infinite, the adventures uncountable, the stories yet untold. And humanity, finally free, stepped boldly into its own story, knowing that the age of men was not just an era. It was a promise, a challenge, and a destiny to be claimed.